Thank you everybody for joining us. We've got attendees from all over the place. We're at about 50, and in the next 5 minutes, I'm guessing that'll go up again. That'll continue to climb. It's a pretty international crowd from all over the place. For those of you that I haven't met in person, my name is Yuriy Zaremba. I'm the curator of this UX designer support group, and I've been mentoring since about March, and these group sessions are a great way for me to get a good message in front of a lot of people at the same time. We're joined today by Alan Florsheim. I personally know Alan from during my time at Amazon. But Alan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself so that I don't butcher your bio?
Well, thanks, Yuri. As Yuri said, I was at Amazon for a long time, and actually, I went to Microsoft and then came back to Amazon over the course of 16 years there. Last stint at Amazon was 10 years. I was the original designer on the Kindle store way back when there was one designer on Kindle. That was me. So I saw the company grow from a long time. I discovered I had a passion for international design, and I because it really makes you focus on kind of what the customer problem is. If you have to ask questions, and like you have to throw away your toolbox. So I was the designer for the Kindle international stores in China, Japan, Brazil, India, et cetera, Australia. And I recently left on to move to a company called PK Global, which is a consultancy. So I'm trying out some new things, learning some new skills, and I love to travel. If you've been watching the pictures in my background, all the pictures are mine. This is it's awesome.
And what are we looking at here? What were you eating?
This is a typical or it's not even South Indian. It's like specific to the Bangalore area. And someone can someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is served on banana leaves, and there's pickles and chutneys, and then a bunch of stuff and some naan and your hands, and it was delicious. Every time the pile disappeared, they just came and slopped on more. All for
now
about
I'm hungry. Well, good going. Now I'm hungry. And the way that we came to come across each other is we actually got to work on Amazon India together, right?
Yep.
And I remember.
Good segue.
And I remember when you were joining our team, I actually got to sit in on your whiteboarding session, and I've said this several times now, but like I've held you as like the master of the whiteboarding session ever since, which is why I asked you to join us today. So that is what we'll be covering today, is design exercises with a focus on the whiteboarding session. And I'd appreciate if we opened it up with just your thoughts on design process in general, because really the whiteboard exercise is really just trying to tease out like what your design process is like in a condensed format. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. So for me, like when you talk about design process, you're exactly right. It is a kind of just a segment that expresses who you are as a designer. So when we think about design process, there's a couple of core things that I always keep in mind. At a high level, always focus on the customer, like know what you're trying to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the whole big picture so you can connect all the dots and don't focus in on any one individual silo. And then it's just I guess the other big thing, and we'll get into the details as we talk in, but the other big thing that I think about is um, this is just we're just people being people. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to voice fears. Don't be afraid to voice excitement. As you merge, go from step to step. Like, just people being people, and people. I mean, everyone's learning new stuff every day. So approach it with open eyes, open arms, and don't be afraid.
That's good advice.
Is that we can? I assume we'll talk more about like the design process later as we go through questions.
Well, I think that that's a great segue, like not being afraid. Can you speak to, can you elaborate more on just like how you would kind of start the exercise off? How you would start framing things like, like
Okay.
they give you the marker. What do you do?
Well, the first thing is, again, remembering always focus on the customer. So what is the problem you're trying to solve? So talking about design exercises here now. The first thing you need to do is figure out what the problem is. So you step back and say, okay, who's the customer? Who's the client? What are we trying to solve? And then you ask they may give you some of these things. Whoever's providing the exercise, they may give you some of this beforehand. But sometimes it will be very open-ended. Um, like I'll use a different example from last time. A design exercise, design a cruise, an experience on a cruise ship. Um, so it could be as vague as that, or and then you say, well, who's it for? And they say, well, who? They'll say, okay, it's for families. And they say, okay, well, and um, there's lots of details. Talking about not being afraid, bring it together. Is with a design exercise, they're oftentimes not going to give you a lot of details. So you can approach it two ways. You can ask the questions, which is totally good,
Mm-hmm.
or and I would say or you could provide your own assumptions. And I think it's often better to say, I can ask questions about the details, or I can give you some assumptions that I'm going to make. And I think the assumptions will probably work better in your favor because it'll show you have some initiative and it'll show you're thinking through the process. If they may have some specific things in mind, if they do, fine, go ahead, use them. But so you're defining what the problem is.
And what are some of the specific questions that you would ask to get that definition?
Okay, who is the customer? What is the are there any limitations that I should know about? They'll usually say no.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a time period? Can you give me specifics about the specific customer? Is it male, female? What age bracket? What income bracket? Really just kind of defining who the person is. Are there other considerations I should be thinking about? If a problem has multiple facets, you're going to ask, okay, there's three different facets that I'm going to focus on. There's the digital, there's the physical, there's the, which one should I focus on? What else am I missing?
What about like modalities? How would you tease out, like, should I be thinking of an app? Should I be thinking of voice? Should I be thinking of an Apple Watch thing? Like what question would help you narrow your blinders?
I actually wouldn't ask that right at the very beginning. I would ask that in the middle, after you figured out who the problem you're trying to solve, and then you're going to start either sketching or framing the question. At that point, there could be different modalities. There could be, is it an app? Is it on a website? Is it a kiosk? Is it and this is a timed effort, so you're not going to be able to answer all of this by any stretch of the imagination. Oh, we should add, Yuriy, that the purpose of this exercise is not to come up with a finished result. The purpose is to kind of show your design process.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that in mind, when you're thinking about the modalities, it's going to narrow down to you, so you can come up with some concrete point of view in the end.
Yeah.
So if you have different modalities, you'll say, well, they'll say you choose one, or they'll say go with
Yeah.
the app. They're probably going to want something with the digital interface, probably.
Yeah.
Um, and then you start drawing 3 screens with the app. Then you're going to have to say which one should I focus on, narrow down to one of the screens. And then you're going to have 3 steps for that one screen. Then you're going to focus on one of them. You're going to continue narrowing down your presentation to finally get to one concrete solution by the end of the exercise.
That's a great point, that like as time goes on, you need to constantly be narrowing. So if you are getting prompted by your interviewer to that, like, okay, so like what would you eliminate next, like take that as a cue that you like try to like drive and narrow a little bit more naturally. Like you should be doing it yourself.
I what one of the things that is really that I learned, that was reinforced to me last time we did this, that you brought up, Yuri, was the
Mhm.
idea, as you're doing this and you're focusing in, make sure you're not siloing yourself completely. You're gonna elevate the you're gonna alter the elevation of your conversation to narrow focus questions, back to broad, down to narrow, back to broad, so that as you're narrowing, as you're presenting, that you're bringing a focus on the um, business solutions as opposed to just the design.
That's a great point, because then you're checking 2 boxes. You're demonstrating that you're a product level thinker, like you can think of the entire business and the entire product when you bring it high, and then you can also provide evidence that you're good at executing and figuring out, like, okay, what are we actually going to build when you go deep?
Yep.
So that's a great point.
Yep.
So going further on, like the actual exercise, can you talk about how to effectively actually like drive the session? So can you speak to like working with whatever criteria you've been given, and like what fidelity should the artifact be like by the end of the presentation? So 2 questions there. It's like, how do you effectively work with the input that you're given by your interviewer, and then what's the
Mhm.
final fidelity that we should be looking at?
Well, at a very high level, Navina just asked a question: do you recommend bringing a timer? So that is the first question. The way to effectively run the interview, you want to take charge, is that you want to keep track of what your time is and how much time you have. You're going to spend 10 minutes or so gathering questions. You probably 35 minutes total. You have 55 minutes or so total in the exercise. So 10 minutes of question asking, and then they're going to take out 5 at the end. So it's another half hour worth of your training. So within that design time, you have to go through that process we just talked about. So you need to keep track of the time, be aware of where you are in the process. Um, that's really important. And number 2, if you the final artifact doesn't have to be a high fidelity artifact. Should have as I mentioned earlier, it should have a solid point of view.
Mhm.
It should be concrete enough that you can stand behind it and say, this is the solution that I'm recommending for this particular whatever it is.
Mhm.
It may have caveats, like I would want to test this and this, or there are some other options that I have in mind, Y and Z, but this is you want to end up with at least one, low to mid rough sketch. And reinforce the fact you do need to sketch. So after that,
Yeah.
after that first 10 minutes of question gathering, you're going to be writing it down on the board, probably.
Yeah.
If you keep it in your head, that's probably not good. You do need to, that's the point, you need your marker out, and that's when you narrow down to that sketch.
Yeah, I found that a lot of people will stay in the framing phase and ask a lot of questions and just like be high level for too long. And then
Yep.
they need to get nudged by the interviewer because they have 5 minutes left and they still haven't actually sketched anything. And then
Yep.
I've also experienced the flip opposite of that, of like some people just won't ask any questions, and then they'll go straight to the whiteboard with a marker and start making an app, right? So
Yep.
yeah, like you have to have a balance of the two.
Yep.
so when things feel like they're kind of like going out of control, or you've lost track of where you're at, or like it just feels like the interviewer is not really tracking what you're trying to do, like what's some advice you can give around like taking control of the whiteboard exercise and kind of like resetting and then making sure that like, okay, like let's get this thing back on track.
Yep, I knew you were going to go there. I knew that you asked that question. The this happens more than you would think. And again, so I want to reinforce a point that I said earlier, like just people being people, you're learning stuff, don't freak out. Like if it doesn't feel like it's going right, it's pausing for a second, looking at what you've done and say, okay, you know what, this doesn't feel, I don't feel answering the question. Let's go back to the initial problem that we're trying to solve. Who's our customer? This is the problem. These are the criteria. Okay, then and you can bring the interviewer in on this. You know, okay, something here, right? Can you like? I want to make sure that you and I are both talking on the same page. Let's focus. I want to focus in on the customer problem. We said this, right? We said this, right? Right. And you can use them to kind of help bring it back to a more viable solution. Sometimes you'll find that you were just off a little bit and you need to reframe. Sometimes you may have to like pivot. You might have to say, you know what, this was not a good solution. You'll discover this over the course of kind of pausing and recalibrating where you are. And if you have to pivot, that's okay. I mean, it shows that have a maturity there to recognize things aren't going right, and that you can you know refocus your thoughts without um, panicking too much. Although you're probably panicking inside a lot.
Which like everyone will, right? But like if you
Yeah,
start
totally.
if you start with like how you mentioned, you know, like you should ideally be framing, and you've kind of like you've rooted yourself in like the problem that you're actually trying to solve. When you look at
Yeah,
that problem and you compare it to like the direction you're taking with your sketches, like that's kind of like your opportunity to breathe for a second of like, am I going going the right direction with this? And if you do pivot, yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And if your pivot ends up like 10 minutes later, it's like, okay, actually this is a better solution. That is like something that the interviewers are conscious of, like because you effectively pivoted, which is what you have to do all the time in your day job of
right.
like, because that's design, right? Like you try something and then you improve on it, and sometimes that improvement results in a pretty sharp pivot, right? So all you're doing is demonstrating in a microcosm how you work in the real world, which is great.
Right. It's a win actually, not it's not a detriment against you.
Yeah. um can you talk a little bit about exploration? So like specifically in kind of like in the middle of it all, right? Like you've done your Q&A, you've gotten the context you need, you've asked the questions. Can you speak to how you would approach like the actual ideation of just like, here's all the different things that we can do to solve this problem, like
Mm-hmm.
um and then how do you create, and then how do you cross stuff out?
How do we create the ideation? How do we cross stuff out? Um,
So like once you start
yeah,
sketching,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
how
yeah,
do you go
yeah, yeah,
broad,
yeah,
and then how
yeah,
do you
yeah.
go?
So no, I want to make sure I'm not rephrasing previously much. But again, if you're focusing on, if all bear in mind what is the problem you're trying to, so you want to, the solution that you're trying to get at the end is something that is, very concrete to answer that particular problem. So as you go, because you're going broad, so let's take that the experience on a cruise ship. It it's for family members, it's for kids, it's for kids, 5 to 12. Um, and now they're gonna have a bracelet. They're gonna have a phone app. Gonna be touch point across the ship. There are all these different methods and approaches to doing it, but you can't solve all of them. So
Hmm.
so you go back to, I want to do an experience on a cruise ship. Well, the experience is, and the purpose for the experience is that the people on the ship are having a good time, and that the kids are involved and not bored. Okay, so if we've ascertained that. So of all those touch points, what solves that problem the best? Maybe it's the band thing. I'm just with
Hmm.
a little readout on it.
Hmm.
And then, okay, so then if I'm going to focus on that, because I think that is the most pertinent solution to this problem.
Hmm.
And so I'm going to focus on the readout on that wristband. Okay, so now I have some screens to work with, and which screen is going to give me concrete result? Is it going to be the entry screen? Is it going to be the I found something screen? Is it going to be the wow, you met someone else screen? Whatever the experience is, pick one of those that most concretely solves the solution. And that's go from broad to narrow. It gives you all the tools to go about, because they're not together.
That's great. And last question, and we'll start to move into the different types of exercises is, how do you understand, how do you start to kind of close? How do you look at the clock and like realize that you have like maybe several minutes left? How do you kind of like start to like close the conversation and, point to the final solution?
Well, let's say you're looking at the clock. You got five. Let's say you got 5 minutes left in the time which you've allotted. At that point, that's when you need to make the call and say, okay, I need to narrow down to this one thing. I need to have a concrete point of view. I would just announce it. And say, I've got 5 minutes left. I want to make sure we end up with something concrete at the end. I've got these 3 different paths that I'm going to choose. This one got these 4 screens in this one path. I'm going to screen these 2 maybe, and this best represents my thinking about solving this. Remember, we're going back to this call, solving this customer problem. Then you have a couple minutes to kind of just quickly tighten up any like loose lines, and it's going to be markers on a whiteboard. So it's going to be, but this is your chance to kind of tighten it up so that it most concretely answers that problem. If all you come down to is like the if description of what the list of what's on a particular screen, say
Hmm.
it's a description, a primary button, a couple secondary problem button, and then whatever it is, if just focus in, make sure that you have a solid opinion on those 3 things on that screen, and say this is this, and then I would end like these are the things I would want to test. Like, always
Hmm.
going.
And we just got a good question. What is there any way to practice all that?
That's a good question. I've never done that. Is there any way to practice? Yeah, just do it.
Yeah,
I mean, on, on,
pick a
honestly,
challenge and just do it.
um, yeah, seriously. And doesn't have to be a whiteboard. It can be do it on paper. Pick a challenge.
Hmm.
Talk to your wife, a friend, you know, and you're not a designer. It gives you that much chance to just do it. Again, this is not this is not life surgery. It's not rocket science. It's just practice.
Thank you, Alan. Really appreciate you joining us again. You've now contributed to 2 sessions. We're really thankful for it. I wanna shift gears into some of the other design exercises that
Yep.
people might come across. So one is app critiques. So in an app critique, what you'll be asked to do is open up an app that you and the interviewer both have on your phones, and the expectation is that you evaluate everything that there is to know about the app, or like everything about the app. They kind of just give you an open mic and ask you to talk through what you're looking at. Some things to keep in mind with an app critique is it's meant to be a conversation, and similar to, if not even more so than the whiteboard exercise, it's designed to where it's hard to practice and prepare for. Like it's hard to like script your answers for, because you don't know what direction they're going to take it. So instead of focusing on like practicing and, you know, like what am I going to say if I get XYZ question, I tend to recommend that people just adopt a basic flow so that they can wayfind and reset whenever necessary. And what I mean by that flow is like always start broad and kind of like Alan was talking about, like with like starting wide and then going into the details, and then go wide and then back into the details. So instead of just staring at a screen and saying, and literally just like, you know, saying, well, what I'm looking at here is there's a search bar, there's a merchandising slot, there's you know, this ad, and then the toolbar has XYZ. Like instead of doing that, evaluate everything that you're looking at by going broad first. So first, why does this app need to exist? Who is it appealing to? Okay, broad. Then, okay, what's the first element that I'm expected to notice here? Okay, there's a huge merch slot asking me to try this new feature. Why are they doing this, right? You're starting to narrow. Then, okay, specifically on this merch slot, there's a unique button that doesn't seem to be matching up with the rest of their design patterns. I wonder why they're doing that. Now I'm like literally talking about a button. I went from talking about the company's ecosystem down to a button. And then do the same thing all over again. Okay, next section. And your interviewer will generally prompt you to like, okay, yeah, that sounds good, keep going. And try to loop in your interviewer wherever possible with like soft breaks. Say something, and then at the very least pause. But if you're feeling like the conversation's allowing it, ask them like, what do you think, right? And make sure that you're also like, you're not just saying what's on the screen, you're sharing some other ideas. And this doesn't mean bash the design that you're looking at. It just means like, be curious, right? So it's like, oh, it's interesting that they made this a card. I wonder what would happen if this would just be a list, or maybe there's like a full screen immersive thing that we could do here. Like on the fly, provide like 2 other ideas for how you would solve the same problem. And then again, move on to the next thing and go and start all over, go broad. Just visualize like you're on a wave, right? Like ride the wave high and then like bring it low and then bring it high and then bring it low. So make sure that you're that you, similar to the whiteboard exercise, that you're always bringing it back to actual problems being solved. So if you feel like you've spent the last 5 minutes talking about rounded corners and colors, that's probably not the fidelity of like and quality of feedback that you should be providing in the exercise. Like make sure that everything that you're speaking to is speaking to some kind of a problem. And even if it is a visual design problem, it should be speaking to consistency, brand, company values, right? Like make sure that it's rolling up to something greater than just like your own aesthetic preferences. And I touched on this a little bit, but I just want to drive the point home. Make sure that you are being humble, right? So don't bash the design, evaluate it, and just like act like you're collaborating with the designer that made the app in the first place, right? Like just you want to share that you're curious, not that you're arrogant. So just keep your tone in check as you do go through it. Like don't like make sour faces and say, wow, this really sucks, right? Like give them the benefit of the doubt and try to figure out like, I wonder why they did it this way, right? I mean, the app if both you and the interviewer have the same app, it's probably doing pretty well. So there's probably a reason that they did some things the way that they did. So that's on app critiques. The next thing that I want to touch on is homework. And take home homework, I feel like is getting less common, but a lot of companies still do this. I don't know why, but they do. The general like signal that the exercise is trying to provide is very similar to what Alan was speaking to with the whiteboard exercise. So make sure that you understand all the little points that he pointed out earlier with that, because a lot of the time the take home exercise is going to end up on a whiteboard. Like once this COVID stuff clears and we're all in offices again and you're in person, right? Like generally your interview, like in the follow up to the take home homework, like they'll actually pull it up and then you'll continue to flesh it out on a whiteboard as you get feedback and questions. And what the homework is trying to, some of the things that you should be demonstrating in the homework is don't just provide like a finished final product that is just another player in the space. So like if the homework that you were given was like, we want to make a comic book store that's online, right? Like don't just go on comicsology.com, copy everything that they do and just move the furniture around a little bit. Like that's not the point, right? Think of a unique problem that you can be solving with this new comic book store. Make that kind of like the theme of what you're doing, and then demonstrate how you explore different ways to solve that problem. So like show something in low fidelity showing here's 3 completely different directions that I consider taking this thing, and then go into high fidelity with one of those solutions. And obviously you don't have data, you don't have colleagues, so like it's okay for you to just pick a direction and fly with it. Just like Alan was talking about with the whiteboard exercise, like at a certain point you just make a decision and run with it. But like it still needs to be rooted in something that you kind of like called as a theme and an initial problem that you went out to solve. And lastly, what's special about your work? Like what's your X factor, right? Like if you assume there's 1,000 other people applying for that good job, what is it about you that goes above the baseline? You can expect that like you need to be checking all the boxes of just like, okay, like they need to be a good interaction designer, they need to be a good visual designer, like you just need to check all the basic boxes of a good designer. But then what is the thing that makes you extra special? Like what makes you bubble up in like one vector? So maybe it's like instead of just doing a bunch of flat mocks, you provide a video demonstrating a lot of beautiful motion transitions. Or maybe like you're a really strong product thinker, and instead of like generating 2 or 3 ideas, like you generate 8, right? Like have one thing that you're very clearly demonstrating you're uniquely good at. So if it's visual design, like also demonstrate how you created a design system and a sticker sheet out of it, or that you did all your own like graphic work or something. I think you guys get what I'm saying. All right, so that's kind of like the prepared stuff that I wanted to cover with Alan. We can kind of shift gears into Q&A now. I'm gonna open up the questions here. Let's maybe start with what's in chat. So to Nabia's question of do you section off brainstorming and sketching, like start sketching when 15 minutes are left? I actually think Alan covered this one. Just keep an eye on the clock and like make sure that you're giving yourself the time.
And to be more specific, 10 if 10 if you have 40, maybe 10 12 minutes 15 minutes is the brainstorming, the rest is sketching.
Yeah.
Would be my recommendation.
What are the most important aspects of the whiteboarding interview that are not identified well in portfolio reviews or other reviews? Like what's unique about the whiteboard interview that they're not going to get out of the other types of interviews?
The ability to think on your feet,
Mm.
the ability to clearly communicate ideas both visually and, well, especially visually, because I'm going to be drawing stuff in probably in the other interviews. You interact in a real design problem solving solution, how you interact with the people you're with. The top three that come to my mind.
Given that hiring is remote now, what tools should we be familiar with so we can better prepare for remote whiteboarding?
In my opinion, Yuri, you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is not, you know that you need to prepare tools. You'll be given some tools to work with,
Mm-hmm.
although because it is, because not everyone uses the same tool, I don't think anyone's going to expect you to learn a new tool. So the common tools, Sketch, Figma, all the way down to PowerPoint and a book, which again broke for me. Um, I think probably what they're gonna say is use what's comfortable for you. They're gonna give you some options, but use what's comfortable for you and go with that.
Yeah, and worst case, like if you have a whiteboard, like it's perfectly fine to
Yeah,
just use a whiteboard. Like the only time that I've done it remotely, it's been on a physical whiteboard or a piece of paper. Like if
we, yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, literally just getting a big piece of paper out, right? Like, and doing the sketching and then holding them up to the camera, like that's the baseline. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, totally. Um, yeah.
Any suggestions for practicing and enhancing storytelling skills? So like, I love this question because it goes broader than the whiteboarding session.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Well, storytelling is one of those things that a skill for sure. And it does cross over kind of everything we do as designers.
Yeah.
Uh, there are plenty of YouTube videos, mediums, articles, stories, resources on the web that are about storytelling. InVision has a good presentation on that. There you can watch videos of people who are actually doing it, actually see it in an example. I suggestion use the resources readily out there to learn storytelling, and it's a great question because it's critical in your ability to go again to communicate visually and with words to your audience.
Thank you, Alan. And what is the most important thing I can take this one. What is the most important thing in a portfolio that employers pay attention to? Storytelling, problem solving, or analysis skills? So between, thank you for that one, Fernaz. So, I mean, this isn't technically related to whiteboards, but I guess I'll try to weave this together in that at the end of the day, all you're trying to get across is that you have solid hard skills. So that's like the actual, like, once you do start sketching, what does it feel like? And that like your design process is like holistic. Like you are able to identify a problem and take it all the way down to a solution. So the whiteboard exercise is just like a microcosm of that, right? Like what you would otherwise take you like 6 hours to articulate or whatever, like you're being asked to do in a half hour. So your case study just blows that up, right? So like you're just allowed to elaborate on it, you're allowed to speak to your experiences, but like you're really just supposed to demonstrate how end to end you have a design process and you have good hard skills. Uh, mistakes to, are there any common mistakes that people make during whiteboarding that they should be wary of? We kind of spoke to this a little bit, I feel like, by just like speaking to time management and stuff, but is there anything else that comes to mind?
Sorry, repeat.
Just like common mistakes that people make in whiteboarding sessions.
Oh, well,
Maybe other than time management, because we already covered that.
well, the biggest one that I can think of is to not ask the questions up front. And I know that I personally have been guilty of that when I was younger. Not framing the problem up front. Not listening to the interviewer, like if they're giving you guidance for a reason, make sure you're listening to them.
Yeah, the questions one, I agree with you, is probably like the number one offense. It's very easy to just go and just like try to, because it's called a whiteboarding session, right? And they give you a marker, so like the temptation is to just like let that ink touch the board.
Yep.
So I completely agree with you there. Let me see. I'm going to see if I can dig up some questions from our last session that were particularly good. Are we allowed to use our phones or devices during the process? So like, are we allowed to like leverage any resources during the whiteboarding exercise?
No.
Yeah, I agree. And the reason for that, I'll park on this one for a second because like Amy asked us to elaborate. The reason for that is like, this is meant to just demonstrate how you make decisions, again, in a microcosm. You're just supposed to go fast. You're not actually supposed to come out of this with like something that's shippable. Like the point is to just demonstrate how you go from one step to the next. So like, I think, Alan, you opened up with just like articulating what your assumptions are. So if there's something that you need to take your phone out for to look up as a resource, I would just speak to that like, hey, I would dive into this thing and try to get this data to make an informed decision. But because we're not doing that here, here's the assumption that I'm going to make, and then move on. There was a similar question around like, are we allowed to ask for specific data? Same point. So I would just articulate the data that you would want to pull, and then again, as Alan said, make an assumption, like just make a claim that is an assumption. Like, I'm going to assume that the data shows this, so I'm going to build my design around that assumption.
Yep.
Even after a whiteboard exercise, a few companies insisted me to do a take-home exercise. What are all expectations from take-home exercises? So yeah, like a lot of the time you will be asked to do like a follow-up, either the same exercise or something that's like in the vein of that exercise. I actually like that in this case the company first gave you a lightweight exercise, and I'm guessing they didn't get enough signal from that, so then they gave you the take-home. I think that that's better than making everyone do the take-home and then doing a whiteboard exercise, because it just shows that they already kind of got some signal from you, and you didn't eliminate yourself. It's just they need more signal.
View it as a positive. Like,
view it as a positive.
Something.
You graduated to the next level, right? So it's not a bad thing. And I feel like a lot of the time designers will get irritated when there's like follow-up, but it really is a good thing. Like, think of it as like, okay, like there's another, like I graduated to the next interview. Even if it feels redundant, usually the people involved will be completely changed, because like the interviewer that did the whiteboard exercise, generally speaking, they'll provide their notes, and then any person following up will have the notes of what to probe on and what signals you didn't provide in the last exercise. So they'll have completely fresh eyes. So assume that you got to do it all over again, and assume that there's something that they're probing on that you didn't deliver in the first round. So what as far as like expectations, just do everything we covered in this session. Like demonstrate end-to-end process. And if you've been given a take-home exercise, also use that as an opportunity to further demonstrate your ability to solve a problem in multiple ways, right? So again, like just as I said, ride that wave, right? So like you went broad and in the whiteboard exercise, you went into the details. So like now, again, with the take home, go broad. Here's all the different ways we could solve this problem, and then pick a solution. Go deep.
And I would add to that, because you have a little bit more freedom here, afraid to use kind of the techniques that one would use. Use research, even if it's made up. You know, here's the research, and here's this is made up because I didn't have time to do it all, but I did ask some friends. You know, ground it in reality a little bit. Here's the user journey. You know, you kind of, when we say end to end, you can fill in some of those holes when you have a little bit more time.
That's a really great point. Like even just like speaking to or bullet pointing out that here's like the type of research tools that I would use like in this type of project. Like even just saying like I would do a card sort, right? Like and the card sorts are great for answering this kind of question. And I'll assume we went through the card sort, and then here's what I would do next. Just even mentioning the tool gives you points. Yeah, and why? Yeah, great point.
And why?
Let's see. If we're not comfortable writing in front of people due to a disability, are there accommodations for that? Anything like that, like I would just let the recruiter know. Generally, companies are very accommodating as long as you're forthright. If you don't give them a heads up, then it'll definitely be to your detriment. But as long as you give them a heads up, like they generally, like companies are pretty accommodating.
I did have one thought as we're answering these questions. You're coming at it, and I've been mostly coming at it from a large on Facebook, Google perspective. There are lots of companies out there besides the big tech companies that do these same processes, and you may find like we're giving you a lot of framework, like kind of how to do these, which is reasonably structured. You find with some smaller companies not quite as mature, that they don't have it quite as buttoned up, but that they have it. So go in everything that we're saying, everything that Yuriy just said, go into it with an open mind, that it may not be quite as structured as we're talking about. Like you may have to ask the recruiter for that. They may not have an answer,
Yeah. But at least give them enough time to figure out what to do with the question.
Exactly. I say that coming from a company that is not as organized.
but the nice thing is that, like, even if you do come in with that disability and you're able to demonstrate that you're able to navigate around it, like that also very clearly articulates a weakness, and then how you how you navigate around that weakness, which is going to be impressive in its own right to the interviewers.
Coolest interview. I was interviewing for a role. I happened to be in London at the time, and I was interviewing for a role in Luxembourg. And I did the interview with a deaf man in Seattle. And so he was deaf, and he did the interview. And so it was amazing what technology can do for you. Like the fact that we could actually have this interview and do this across the world with a very with an impairment is amazing. So yeah, ask.
Since you said app critique is like a conversation, do interviewers also respond on what interviewee says during app critique interview? If so, am I supposed to challenge or elaborate on the interviewer's point? So the interviewer is generally only going to be as engaged as you allow them to be. And one of the things that App Critique is trying to tease out is how collaborative you are as a team member, right? So as I mentioned, like as you ride that wave that I was talking about, go broad and then dive into the details. Once you've hit the bottom of the details, take a pause and ask yourself if this is an opportunity to engage your interviewer and also get them to like contribute. It completely depends on the interviewer. Some interviewers really enjoy acting like you're a team member and like even giving ideas, and it'll feel supernatural and it'll feel super casual. Other interviewers, like myself, not so much. Generally, I'm gonna just be like, no, keep going. I want to hear what you have to say, right? Like, so it completely depends on the interviewer. So as long as you ask the question, it still kind of like gives you brownie points for being collaborative, right? So like, so rule of thumb in all different flavors of design interview, whether you're presenting a portfolio deck or going through your website or doing a whiteboard interview, make sure to introduce pauses, and at the very least, like especially during these times, look up at the screen and check your interviewer's body language. You'll generally get a vibe for if they're expecting you to keep going, or if they look like they want you to pause and talk about something. So take pauses, like let your interviewer also contribute, and then start the process all over again. Go broad, go deep.
Looking at the Q&A.
Okay, everybody. I think we covered more or less everything. Go ahead, Alan.
There's a couple more here.
Okay, take it away.
Janani asks, for the take-home exercise, if the interviewer gives you 1 week to complete it, should you take the whole week to do it? They'll never give you 1 week.
Yeah.
They will give you less time than you probably want. And I would, quite honestly, I would turn it in at the time they asked for it, and up to your discretion to how much you want to put into it. If you feel like you're done, if they give you 3 days and you feel like you're done on 2 days, you probably do more. In my opinion.
Yeah, so to Alan's point, there's kind of 2 ways to potentially approach it. So if you do take, like if you're given 3 days and you take the full 3 days, to Alan's point, like it better be really there better be a lot of design work.
Yeah.
Like, so if the recruiter said like don't spend any more than an hour on this, which always drives me crazy because they know that you're going to spend more than an hour, like if you take the full time that you've been allotted, like it better be super fleshed out. On the flip side of that, if you deliver something that same day, or like you use like a third or less than half the time, you'll get more like it's going to be received more well if like it's lower fidelity and not quite as polished. So like I know that at Google, I don't know if this still rings true today, but I know that at Google, in their kind of like interview tricks days, like I feel like Google was pretty famous for like having a lot of like background tricks for like questions and different exercises that they'd have you do. This may be myth, but I've heard from Googlers that like if you take more than 2 days to, if you've been given, I think like they give you like 5 days or something, and if you take more than 2 days, no matter what the project was, like it's kind of like you're already on your back foot. I wouldn't go as far as to say that like it's like you've been disqualified, but like because what they're also trying to tease out with it is how enthusiastic are you about the job. So like so to Alan's point, like if you do take the full allotted time, like you better check all the boxes that we covered in this session, including that X factor, right? You better be demonstrating motion or like a crazy amount of exploration or a really robust prototype, something that's like been polished out. But if you're not planning on fleshing it out to that high of a fidelity, make sure that you turn it in fairly quickly.
But if you do that, be prepared to answer the questions during the interview. If you make it to the next stage, all the things you didn't do in your initial thing, questions about, rightfully so.
Yeah. We got a question from Jose. What's up, Jose? I know Jose. How did you get started on your UX journey that ultimately led you to continue down this path? For me, we're just about at time, but I'll try to do this in 30 seconds so that Alan, you also have 30 seconds. Is for me, 2008 happened, I got laid off. And one of the only skills that I had at the time, because I never went to like college, like I took some classes but never graduated, were just like my creative skills. So I parlayed that into web design, and that it resulted in a robust portfolio pretty quickly. And then eventually my portfolio got the attention of big tech, and 10 years later, now I'm a big tech product designer. Alan?
Your answer is relevant than mine, I think, because I made the progression from graphic design to product design to UX design, and then watch the terminology changes as it does go from wide to narrow, wide to narrow. Yeah, so follow your dream. Find the thing that you're interested in. In the space school, you don't have to be a design background. Find the thing that you like to do and pursue it.
That's great advice. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Alan, thank you so much for now donating your time for 2 sessions in back-to-back weeks. I personally have gotten a lot out of these sessions. I hope everyone else has too. Everybody, it's Alan Floresheim. You can connect with him on LinkedIn. I encourage you to shoot him a personalized thank you note to show your appreciation. He completely donated his time. Thank you so much, Alan.
If you do that, please note that you attended this session, because I've been getting a lot of requests from who I have no idea who they are, and I've ignored those.
So make sure to actually write a thank you note if you're connecting with Alan.
And
love it. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap. Thank you so much. I hope to see you all in the group, and yeah, have an amazing weekend. And if we don't do another one of these sessions again, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.